The leadership race that followed Stephen Harper's departure after almost 10 years as Prime Minister was a long, feisty battle with an unexpected winner, 38-year-old Saskatchewan MP and former Speaker of the House of Commons, Andrew Scheer, who eked out a 13th ballot victory over higher-profile candidates such as Maxime Bernier, Kevin O'Leary and Kelly Leitch. And he takes the helm of the Conservative Party, looking for unity and a new path to electoral success. So, joining us now on his plans for Canada's Conservatives and the country, from Regina, Saskatchewan, Andrew Scheer, Conservative MP for Regina Qu'Appelle and the leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition. Mr. Scheer, it's good to have you in that chair and on our program. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
I would like to start actually by going back a few months to that night when they made the announcement that you had won the Conservative Party leadership by basically 51-49. I mean, it was about as close as it can get. Do you remember what first went through your head when you heard the final score?
Well, first, when they announced the margin of victory, I was on pins and needles. Just before they announced the name of who the successful candidate was, the announcer said something along the lines of, and the winner with 51% of the vote, and then kind of paused. So I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be close. If it's Maxime or me, it's going to be it's a very tight margin. And then when they announced my name, it was just a great sense of excitement, elation. You know, I had been working for 8 months with a dedicated team of volunteers. It was all coming in culmination in that moment. It was just an amazing sensation, followed immediately by a great sense of the responsibility that I just inherited, leading a team now, providing that alternative to Canadians. I immediately recognized we have our work cut out for us. I'm going to need a good team around me, and the work really needs to start right away. And then I was up on stage to give the speech, and then chat with folks in the convention hall. So it was a whirlwind right from that moment on.
Well, let's follow up on those responsibilities as you've just outlined them. And to do that, I want to share just a series of numbers here. This is from Forum Research, just released the other day, which shows the approval ratings of the current three leaders in the House of Commons of the major parties. The Prime Minister's got 49% approval. Thomas Mulcair, even though he's on his way out, his NDP leader has got 36%. And there's you in third with 25%. About half of those surveyed said they didn't know enough about you to comment. And let's follow up on those numbers with these from Campaign Research, which indicate how much faith the Canadian public has in your, for example, ability to unify the Conservative Party. 28% say yes, only 17% no. Able to take on the role of a Prime Minister, about even there, 22% saying yes and 26% saying no. Shares their values, only 20% saying yes, 30% saying no. Balancing all of that, how would you define what your mission is right now?
Well, you know, every poll is a snapshot in time, and towards the end of the session, the numbers were quite good. I told people around me, I said, look, we don't get too elated with the good polls, and we don't worry too much about other kinds of polls. We know there's 2 years towards the next election. I won the leadership with only about 3 weeks left in the sitting, and so whereas some leaders take over the helm of a party and then immediately have some time in the House to hold the government to account, to go toe-to-toe with the Prime Minister day after day. I didn't have that. In fact, the Prime Minister wasn't in the House for the first week or so after our leadership race was over. So this summer, I've hit the barbecue circuit. I've been to every province. By the end of this week, I'll have been to every province, and I was up in Yellowknife for the Northwest Territories, talked to a lot of local media, did a lot of events in different regions outside of large centers, trying to introduce myself to Canadians. So,
well, one of the reasons they might not know who you are is because, of course, you had a very different job before this one. You were the impartial Speaker of the House, and I wonder how different it is to go from that job, which is supposed to be absent partisan politics, to the job you now have, which, of course, is very partisan.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Speaker of the House of Commons is a very important role, and certainly does have a profile on Parliament Hill and in the parliamentary community. But obviously outside the Hill, I do have that extra challenge now of getting my name and profile out there. So that was a big part of this summer. When I was Speaker, it was, you kind of develop that compartmentalization, and you just put aside any philosophical or political views you might have, and you make rulings based on the objective rulings that went before you. There's a lot of jurisprudence, so to speak, in Speaker's ruling, and one ruling by one Speaker leads to a future ruling by a future Speaker, and then there's kind of a continuity there. So we used to say around the table with the nonpartisan officials, the clerks of the House of Commons, you know, if we could reverse the names of the parties and come to the same decision, then we knew we had the proper decision. So very nonpartisan, very nonpartial, not talking about issues or policies, just more about the rules of the House and how they apply. After the 2015 election, I was back in caucus. You know, it was clear that the Liberals were going to, you know, choose the Speaker. I went back into caucus, and I immediately re-engaged on all those things that that motivated me to run back in 2004. The things I believe in: smaller government, greater freedom, a more dynamic private sector. And so I very quickly got right back into the swing of things. Became the House Leader for the official opposition. Ron Ambrose appointed me to that role. And that's where I had an opportunity to display some of the leadership abilities I had to the rest of my caucus.
Well, I think Ontarians would be interested to know, and don't take this the wrong way because there's no disrespect intended here, but I think everybody knows you're not going to out-charisma the current occupant of the Prime Minister's office. So what is the sort of unique selling proposition that Andrew Scheer is offering Canadians?
Well, basically, you know, selfies and stylish socks won't pay the bills. We see a lot of policies that the Liberals are pursuing that are hurting families, whether it's canceling popular tax credits like the public transit tax credit, whether it's eliminating income splitting, whether it's lowering the cap on tax-free savings accounts. So the Prime Minister has a lot of celebrity appeal, but more and more Canadians are seeing that his policies are hurting the very people he claims to help. Right now, he's engaged in a massive assault on small businesses that employ 75% of the workforce in the private sector. So these are real jobs at stake. These are our mom and pop stores and communities that keep communities alive, and they're all going to have to pay a higher tax burden, which means fewer jobs. So it's the policies that we're going to come forward with in the next 2 years. I believe we can convince Canadians to, you know, don't be fooled by the sizzle if there's no steak. And the Conservative Party, under my leadership, will have an ambitious set of positive policies that will speak to the aspirations of Canadians.
I appreciate your position on that, but of course, before people consider whether they want you for Prime Minister, I think you have to demonstrate, at least this is the conventional wisdom, that you've sort of got control of your own group. And I want to know how you're going to do that, given that you won your convention with less than 51% of the vote. It was 50.95. And given that, I mean, your friend Patrick Brown in Ontario can tell you what a tough job it is to unite economic conservatives, foreign policy conservatives, democratic conservatives, red Tories, social conservatives, libertarians. I mean, they're all there in that big blue tent. How the heck do you do that?
Well, you're absolutely right that it's a challenge for any leader, regardless of what the margin may have been or the other types of candidates that were running. I can tell you the sense in the caucus, you know, right after the leadership was a great sense of enthusiasm and unity. We all had our say in the race. Each of us, you know, who backed other candidates or who supported my leadership or, you know, stayed neutral. We all had a vote. Every member of our party had a vote. They have the opportunity to have a say in our system. Once that result comes in, you move on and you look forward. And there's a lot of common ground between all the different kinds of conservatives you mentioned. I like to say that if we have a list, two sheets of paper, and on one we write down all the issues or the policies that divide conservatives that we can't agree on, and on the other, write down all the ones we do agree on and that we can have that common ground. Which list should we tackle first? I know the answer to that question for me, and that's what I've offered my caucus, to say, look, there's a lot of issues that overlap the different kinds of conservatives. Let's get to work on those ones. Let's put those in the store window for Canadians so that we can earn their trust back. And one thing that is for certain, no matter what kind of conservative you are, when Justin Trudeau is Prime Minister, it's bad news. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for national defense. It's bad for foreign policy. So that's my message to members of my own team in caucus and also to the Conservative Party membership, that we win when we're united, and there's so much that we can agree on.
Since you mentioned the current Prime Minister, I did want to follow up on one line in the speech that you gave, your victory speech at the convention in Toronto. And that was, you said to the current Prime Minister, I'm not going to let you do to this generation what your father did to my generation. And I must tell you, my ears pricked up when I heard that, because I mean, it's usually a given in politics that you don't go after a guy's family. Now, I realize that, you know, his dad is not just any ordinary dad. He was the former Prime Minister. But tell me why you put it just that way.
Well, you know, I have 5 wonderful kids. They're ranging in age from 12 to 1.5. And I don't want them to be saddled with the billions of dollars in debt that the Prime Minister is adding to the national debt. And when I think back to when I started my working career, a good percentage of my tax dollar was going to pay just the interest on the massive debts that Pierre Trudeau left us. And Pierre Trudeau, massively increased the size of the federal government, massively increased government spending, spent a lot of tax dollars on projects and programs that now aren't even there for my generation. The spending was done in the 70s and 80s, and that the money ran out, and a lot of the programs got cut back in the 90s because the debt was so big. And that's not fair. It's not fair to the next generation of Canadians to leave them with the bill for spending today. And I wanted to make that point because, first of all, my generation and those a little bit older and younger are still working to pay off the debt from the federal government in the early 80s, those massive deficits. And I don't want that to happen to my kids. There's a lot of positive signs about an economic recovery. I think the Liberals are doing everything they can to impede that. But it's the spending, it's the debt, it's the fact that as interest rates rise, when my kids enter the workforce, more and more of their hard-earned money is going to pay the interest on the spending that Justin Trudeau's racked up, and it's not even benefiting Canadians today. It's money being spent around the world on pet projects, ideological
I appreciate
things.
all that. Forgive me for jumping in. I appreciate all that, but I do recall Justin Trudeau in the campaign that elected the Liberals saying, Conservatives are not our enemies, they're our neighbors. I'm wondering why you are not concerned that you're not looking like a guy who's going after his dead father a little too harshly.
Well, I don't take it that way at all. I'm talking about the policies. I'm talking about the same types of tax and spend policies. It's in the Liberals' DNA. We see it time and time again in different iterations of Liberal parties where they have an addiction to raising taxes. They aren't worried about the economy that they're leaving future generations. So I think when we're talking about policies, when we're looking at what hasn't worked in the past, we know what the consequences of that are. We see this Prime Minister pursuing the exact same path. I think it's fair to make the comparison.
Okay, let me ask you about, I'm not going to pretend that this is your favorite subject, but you have discussed it in the past, and so I want to just explore it a little bit. Rebel Media, Ezra Levant, you've said you're not going to give them interviews anymore. How come?
Yeah, well, as I said several times on this issue, I watched what was happening in Charlottesville. I saw the outrageous displays of racism and hatred that have no place in a civilized society, and I do think there's a fine line between reporting on facts and saying, okay, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, and in any way adding legitimacy or an extra platform or any kind of validation or agreement with some of those views being expressed. So that's why I took the decision on a go-forward basis that unless something changed, unless the editorial policy changed, I just wouldn't be lending my voice or my platform in that regard.
But you did make yourself available for interviews to them in the past. Your campaign manager once worked with them. You jokingly, I think, agreed to go duck hunting with Faith Goldie, who has since been fired from that outfit. What changed?
Well, as you said, that was prior, and what changed for me was watching those events in the way that I thought, the fine line between reporting on what's going on, holding up a light to events that are happening, and in any way adding legitimacy to them.
Okay, let me ask you, because just the other day you released your shadow cabinet, which is essentially the critic responsibilities in Parliament, and this is one of those occasions where the people who weren't in actually got more attention than the people who were in. And I guess, obviously, given that she's an Ontario MP, I should spend a second here just trying to understand why Kelly Leitch was not your former leadership rival, why she did not get any responsibilities.
Well, yeah, I would argue a little bit on the premise that there's a lot of attention given to some people who did have role are going to be in the shadow cabinet and all that they bring to the table. I can tell you that choosing a shadow cabinet is one of the most difficult things for a leader to do, probably second only to choosing an actual cabinet, and finding roles for so many hardworking and talented people. There's so many ways to play to make a contribution to help the team out, both within shadow cabinet and without. And so we've got some members who aren't in shadow cabinet but are going to be playing an important role in developing policy.
Will that be Kelly Leitch? Does she have an important role in developing policy?
Every member of the caucus has the ability to advocate for the things that they believe in and contribute to discussions on things. And we've done the shadow cabinet now. There are a lot of people who want to contribute, who have ideas on how they can do that. And I'm going to be using the talents of everyone in caucus to build that positive
Okay, I just want to be clear on this, though, Mr. Scheer, because obviously the initial reaction was Andrew Scheer is sending a signal that she is finished in Conservative politics in particular and maybe Canadian politics in general. Can you speak to that?
No, I'm not going to comment on all the thought processes that go into who's going to play a role and not. I want to show Canadians that this is the team that's going to lead us into the next election. These are the shadow ministers that are going to be developing those important policy alternatives to Liberals and communicating them to Canadians. So my goal is building that team of hardworking individuals that can do that. It's a tough choice to make. You have to weigh everybody's strengths and weaknesses and challenges, what they bring to the table. And at the end of the day, I'm confident in the choices I made, and I'm confident that Canadians are going to see in that team that we're presenting a great positive vision for the country.
Okay, just a few minutes left. I want to see if I can touch on two more things. It was, of course, a former Conservative Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, who tried really hard to get Quebec's signature on the Constitution after it was not there from the 1981 process. And your caucus is going for an annual retreat, I guess, in Winnipeg later this week. And I wonder whether you can gauge whether there's any appetite at all in that caucus, if you were to win and become Prime Minister, for reopening constitutional talks so that 10th province can finally sign on in a way it heretofore has not.
Mm-hmm. I can tell you, I traveled through Quebec a lot during the leadership race, and of course talking with my Quebec colleagues since the leadership race is over. I don't sense that appetite for reopening the Constitution. I think there are a lot of practical steps that the federal government took under the previous Conservative government to respect provincial jurisdiction, to appropriately fund important programs at the provincial level, and respect the ability of each provincial government to govern themselves, and recognize some of the unique nature of Quebec's government and Quebec's place in Canada and in Canadian society. So I don't get the sense that there's that appetite. I'm certainly going to be focusing on practical issues that we can offer Canadians going into the next election.
Let me ask you about another issue that has been obviously on the minds of a lot of Canadians, and that is the Omar Khadr decision, the compensation that he has received as a result of a court decision, and the federal government made its decision to compensate him to the tune of many millions of dollars. Your caucus did something somewhat unusual, I think. You had many MPs fanning out and doing media interviews in the United States even, which I don't think I've seen before in quite that way. Is that the plan going forward?
Well, there are many times when opposition MPs speak to international media, many examples of the Liberals doing that when they were in opposition. I believe it's critically important that our friends and neighbors in the United States understand that Canadians do not support this decision, that this was a decision by the Liberal government that is offside with the vast majority of Canadians, and sending that signal that outside of the Liberal government, Canadians are behind our allies, our sympathies are with the true victims of this whole ordeal, the widow and the children of Sergeant Scheer, whose life was taken by Omar Khadr. So I think it's critically important, especially when we're dealing with sensitive issues like NAFTA and the response to North Korea, that Americans understand that individual Canadians, Canada as a society, is on their side and does not support this massive payout to Omar Khadr.
Okay, we've covered some fairly heavy topics here, so let's leave this on a somewhat light note. You are, I think, the only opposition leader to move into Stornoway, which is the residence of the official opposition leader, with 5 young kids. And I wonder if you've had a chance to childproof that place yet.
Well, we told the National Capital Commission, which manages all the official residences, to please take anything of value and just put it in storage. We don't want to be the ones responsible for smashing some priceless heirloom. So we've asked for a little bit of consideration that certainly nothing at kid arm level should be worth anything more than a few dollars, because 5 kids, they're great kids, they're well behaved, but you know what it's like, they can get a little bit rambunctious, and we just don't want to have any accidents breaking some priceless artifact of Canadian history.
Very good. Mr. Scheer, we thank you for your time here on TVO tonight and wish you well. All the best.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.